And I wanted to say at the beginning that Kostya and I are not going to be monitoring the chat for this. This is why we have Allie up in the corner there. She's also from CTE, and she'll be watching the chat and then chiming in with any, if you have some pertinent questions while we're talking, because we're not really great at multitasking. So we didn't want to try to manage it all. Um, I see that,
We're
yeah.
also recording this, so the video is recording just our screen, so it shouldn't be recording. I don't think it's recording everybody else's faces, but if you feel like you don't want to show your face, you're okay. But right now it's still recording just our screen, so you should be okay. But thanks again. We're gonna start in about right now. Um, and the topic of today's workshop is called American Classroom Management. We're going to talk about a lot of fun things. If
Yeah,
you,
because classroom management is nothing but fun, let me
yeah,
tell you.
and this is meant for international students, international teaching assistants, international instructors. If you do have any questions, again, like Jane said, please feel free to put them in the chat, Allie will help us. Well, she'll let
Mhm.
us know about the questions, and we'll address them.
And if we have time at the end, of course, we can have a Q&A session. Just to get this started, and if we were here all live together, you could talk to your partner or whatever. But just on your own, kind of think about the typical classroom environment in your country. And what I mean is, what's expected from the instructor? What are you expected to do if you are the student? And those are the kind of issues that we'll be talking about. So what I'm trying to get you to do right now is just think about, what are you expecting to get from this workshop? Do you have some particular questions that you already have in mind about how this works here in the United States versus your own country? If you would like, you can put some of these in the chat now. Otherwise, I'll just give you a few seconds just to kind of think about that.
Maybe an example of this would be like, how in some cultures, all you do is like take notes and sit quiet, listen to the instructor. Whereas like here in the US, you can't just sit quiet. You have
Yeah,
to interact.
interact.
And we'll be talking about all these different challenges related to those interactions and stuff like that. It's gonna be fun, hopefully.
So I wanted to start out with this clearly AI generated slide here. We're going to cover first, so we'll have two parts to this. The first is general classroom management, and then we'll also talk specifically about what do you do with small groups in a class. And I went ahead and included this because right now, I mean, let's just be honest, the world's on fire and everybody's freaked out. The instructors are freaked out, the students are freaked out. And what if AI is going to take over everything anyway? So I put this picture in because just to reassure you that AI's got a ways to go. You can see the clocks here, not very accurate. And why are there two of them? And, why is that woman's leg going through the table? And I'm sure if I generated another one of these next week, it would be much better. That's the speed of AI changing. But what we want to do right now in this workshop, especially, is to kind of reassure you that there are things you can do about some of your classroom management issues. So, issue number one, if you have a live classroom and the students are talking during the class, what should you do and how should you approach this? So first is the easiest one, and the obvious go-to is just to ignore the students and hope that they're talking about what did they just say, and talking about actual classroom stuff. So ignore it first. And then if it continues, your students are still talking, to just say, okay, there's a lot of chatter in the room today. Let's regroup, focus, come back and think about what we're talking about here right now. So just not the students themselves, but the class in general. The next thing you can do, and this helps when you're 56 and you have gray hair and you have a lot of respect, that you can just actually approach the students where they are in the classroom and just kind of look at them.
Give them a dirty, judgmental look.
be all judgy and see if that takes care of the situation. And at that point, pretty much, yeah,
Usually it does.
that'll take care of it. And if that still doesn't work, then of course you can take the students privately after class. What we don't want you to do is actually name them by name, call them out in class, and
Hmm.
have all the other students feel awkward and horrible. That's tricky issue number one. Tricky issue number two is probably not a thing in most other countries. And so I wanted to bring this up here in the United States because it's becoming more and more of an issue as time goes by. So there's a difference between service animals, which is usually your service dog down there in the left corner, who is trained to work with one specific person, usually blind person. Um, and that is their job, or maybe the person has a medical issue or something, that the dog will be watching for seizures. That is that's a legally protected animal. And then we also have therapy animals. That's the middle column there, and then emotional support animals over on the far right column. Emotional support animal can be anything. It can be a ferret or a raccoon or
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, usually it's a dog, but those are not legally allowed. In other words, if you are an instructor and someone comes in with a service dog, you are required to let that service dog be in there. And the service dog is there on a job. They're not there to interact with the other people. A therapy animal, the one in the middle, those are like they're just trained to come in, work with anybody in any situation. Maybe there's some tragedy, or at the end of the semester, usually we have therapy animals that come into the library just to snuggle with the students so the students feel better. But they're not trained for one just specific person. So really, that's the difference. So if someone does bring a dog in and the dog is disruptive in your class, you can say, no dogs in here, no support animals. And I hope this never happens, but just in case it does, that what your resources are. And again, a service dog that has a jacket and is working with one person, you are required to let them stay in your class and they won't be disruptive. They're trained.
And if you're a student, just remember, like, even if you're having like a maybe a stressful exam or something, you can't just bring or like a regular dog or your cat from your house and be like, well, I have a stressful exam. I
I,
need this, right? So obviously you do need to have the dog needs to be either service therapy or emotional, but you can't just like bring your pet. Because
yeah.
otherwise I would bring my dog to work every day.
And that would make work more fun. Let's
Absolutely.
let's let's
Absolutely.
face it. Tricky issue number three are disappearing students. And by that, I mean a student was doing okay in your class for a while and then either stops coming physically to your face-to-face course, or maybe it's an online course and they just aren't turning in their homework anymore. They seem to have just disappeared.
And can I just say one quick thing? It is important to notice these things. So especially if you are an instructor, you might be a TA or you might be an actual the primary instructor. It is important to keep track of your students, even if you might have, I don't know, sometimes there are classes with like 30 plus students. But if you have noticed somebody is or has not been coming, there could be a variety of reasons, but it's important to notice that and we'll talk to you about what to do with that, but if you do notice something, you have to do something about it.
hmm And especially because, I mean, let's just be honest, students are more and more our customers now over time, just kind of culturally. And they're not near as distant from the instructor as they were kind of previously. And
Hmm.
maybe you can think about in your own country, where here's the instructor, and then the students are way down here, and there's not so much interaction. But the students kind of expect that from the instructor now. And it shows up on your feedback at the end of the
Hmm.
semester. So our go-to as instructors, our immediate, kind of thinking about this is the student's a slacker, they're lazy. What's the matter with students these days? They just don't do the work anymore. They expect all this hand holding. So that's our immediate response, and that may in fact be the case with a particular student, but it could be something else that they're not letting you know and that you would have no way of knowing. So they could be, have some physical things. Maybe they were at UVU yesterday and they just can't get it together enough
Mhm.
to come into class today. So to give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe it's not just because they're lazy. Maybe also it's week 3 and they don't know the drop and withdrawal rules here at the U, and so they just haven't gone through the process. So to you, it looks like they're still enrolled in the course. In their mind, they're gone, and they just haven't done the paperwork and the process to actually drop or withdraw. So what can you do with these students? I really hope that you or your main instructor, or what are they called?
Mhm.
Okay.
Primary
Yeah, okay,
instructor.
primary instructor, had a really spelled out attendance policy. What is the attendance policy? And I really hope that there is one and that you're sticking to that so that it's not on you making a decision about this, but the syllabus says whatever your policy is. You can also reach out to the student via email, and I cannot overemphasize how effective this can actually be. That just you connecting with the student and saying, "Hey, I noticed that you haven't been turning in your homework recently, or you used to come all the time and now you're not here in class. What's up?" Can make a huge difference. So if you don't already know this in Canvas in the gradebook, when you go to an assignment, you have those 3 mystery dots that nobody clicks, just out of curiosity. So oh, you're so good.
Sometimes.
Post is so good. Um, and if you click it though, it will bring up this dialog box here. And one of your choices is message students who. So you don't actually have to individually go through all of the students that didn't turn something in,
Hmm.
and you can choose. So you have again a menu here. So if they haven't submitted their homework, you can message all of them. I was so sad in this semester that 5 of my students already in week 1 had not done their homework. And you can type a message just saying, "Hey, remember that I don't take late homework," or whatever your policy is, or just wondering if everything's okay. This is how you find your assignments, or whatever you want to say, and send it to all of them at once. Okay, tricky issue number 4. If they are turning things in late, check with the professor regarding the late submissions policy and stick to it. And I hope again in the syllabus that this has already been spelled out. And I am not advocating that you have an incredibly strict process for this and you don't take anything late. So that's really your personality, the size of your class, what your topic is. All of those factors go into what is your late submission policy. Tricky issue number 5, academic misconduct. So we used to think of this really in terms of plagiarism. And all of you listening to this know that in the United States, plagiarism is a huge issue, and someone has a visceral or an immediate reaction if they feel like they're being plagiarized, that the other person is just cheating. And not every culture approaches plagiarism with that same kind of mindset. But now, today in 2025, we are also figuring in the AI factor in all this. And, is how much can you use AI? And that's one of the biggest questions we get at the Center for Teaching Excellence is, what do I do? My students are cheating,
Hmm.
and how can I show it? And what do I do about it? And so it's a little late now. Your semester's already going, but you really need to be clear about what the policy is and make sure that your professor has spelled that out. If there is no policy in place, then talk to your professor. What do you, if you're grading something, you're like, this is AI, then, and see how they want to approach this. But in the future, I really recommend that you have some kind of policy set up, about what is acceptable and what is not. And if you don't even know how to go about this, or how do I set up assignments so that they're AI proof, there's no such thing, but we do have suggestions at CTE on how you can go about kind of making sure that the students are doing the work and learning what you want them to learn. Tricky issue number 6 is the trickiest one, especially in light of yesterday's UVU incident, that what happens if the students are actually misbehaving in class? They're disorderly, or they might have a gun, or who knows what the situation is. So if it's a total emergency in your class, campus police is your first go-to. If it's just sort of behavioral things, like they're sending bad emails to you or to each other or something else, you are not expected to be a therapist for your students and to have this all figured out on your own. So you can, the link, we'll put the PowerPoints in the chat later, but this is how to report these kind of things. And I also put in some phone numbers here that you can look at on your own, to refer the student to other therapy options, again, so that you don't feel like you have to solve everybody's problems, or that you are some trained therapist in your classroom.
I just have a quick comment. I feel like it's also important. I feel like a good instructor, whether you are TA and RA, whether you're just teaching, it's important to be perceptive. If you notice that something is off, you would probably know your students better. When I've had experiences where I had to call the campus police. I've had experiences where I had to submit the form that Jane mentioned. Again, it's not your job to deal with that. Obviously, you're not trained to deal with these kind of situations. Your job is more like, if you do notice that something is clearly off, maybe there's a threat in your classroom, maybe, or something else, right? Your job is to report that to someone who is trained to do this. But if, make sure that you don't do nothing. That would be even worse, right? But if you do notice something, if you go to that link, there's a bunch
Mhm.
of different options, different like situations and scenarios, right? Like what could be the issue, and then you could choose one. If you're not sure, just, you can describe that you're not sure, but something is off. But please make sure that you do submit this if you notice that something is off. Not
Mhm.
doing anything at all isn't gonna
Yeah,
solve the
that's the
issue.
worst. Yeah, yeah. All right, I think we're gonna change gears now and not be quite so doom and gloomy, as I would say. And I'll let Kostya do a lot of this next set of strategies here for 4 possible group work issues when the students are actually in groups in a live classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so let's say this one is probably good, especially if you are an international student. So let's say you're not sure you understood the student's question. So let's say somebody asks you a question and you're like, in your head, you're like, wait, are they asking this or that? So, the first suggestion that we have for you is don't try to guess, because sometimes if you guess wrong, it creates even, encourages, I don't know,
It's more awkward.
it's just more awkward, because then you're answering something that they didn't ask, and then it shows that you assumed that that's what they asked, and that
Mhm,
creates a whole bunch of problems. So
mhm,
if you're not sure what they asked you, just don't try to guess.
mhm.
Um, Another thing, especially if you are from another country, is, let's say Jane's asked me something, I'm like, What? So I would say, well, with her, maybe I could do that. But normally, if
It's
you
because you're my pal.
right, but if you are teaching a class or something, or even if you're like in a group at work, right? So don't just say what, because that even though that is a legitimate question, like we what, it could come across as rude.
Hmm.
There's so many different ways that we'll show you some examples how you can answer these questions better. Um, and also, make sure that you tell, let's say a student, if you're working in group, asks a question, maybe you're not the only person who didn't hear the question.
Hmm.
Maybe the other students also didn't hear the question. So make sure that when you clarify the question, make sure that the rest of the students also heard the question and obviously also hear the answer. Another one, and this is, and maybe I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I've taught a lot of ESL classes, so English as a second language. And one of the common things, so let's say if somebody asks you a question and you're like, you didn't understand, and so you immediately think, oh, I didn't understand because I'm not a native speaker, right? So you immediately think, oh, it's just my listening skills, or
Hmm.
maybe it's just my grammar. So honestly, it's sometimes because the person was quiet, maybe they
Hmm.
asked something.
Hmm.
Um, that you're not familiar with. It's not a specific, it might not be just a language issue at all. I'm sorry.
I'm just going to jump in. And while we're on this topic, I don't think we have this in the slides, but I wanted to make I also taught ESL for 25 years or something. So, um, if you are the one who somebody asks you to repeat what you just said or asks you what you just said, my advice on that is to say the exact same words that you had just said before and not
Oh yeah.
assume that your grammar was bad or you used the wrong words and then you try to change things. Because what happens is, right, you say blah, 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 and the person says, what did you say? And then you change it and you're making it extra hard for your listener. So just say exactly what you had said before, say it a little bit louder, a little bit slower, and hopefully that will clear things up, so that you're not putting more work on your listener, which is not totally related to this, but
No, totally.
yeah,
That's
okay.
yeah. It's tempting to like, um, and it doesn't have to be like it could be any kind of situation, right? Somebody asks you a question. It's so tempting to like paraphrase it,
Yeah.
but literally, no offense to, I'm actually not originally from the US, but Jane is. But you probably have noticed how loud Americans are. So they're
What?
not just loud, but they're also like they're used to that loudness and they expect others to speak loud. So you might come from a
Not to stereotype.
not to stereotype, you might be from a culture where you
The
talk about
women are
quieter.
quieter.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So make sure you just repeat the same thing but louder.
Hmm.
Here are a couple of examples that you can some phrases that you can use. Instead of saying what, right? You can
Hmm.
say, sorry, could you repeat your question so we can all hear
Yeah.
it, right? Or
Hmm.
sorry, I'm not following. Are you saying this and this? This is more like confirming, right? So
Hmm.
it's a good way to ask again. And then just to clarify, when you say this, you mean this and this, right?
Hmm.
And that would be a way more polite way to ask instead of like what?
Yeah.
Repeat.
And also it benefits everybody else in the group so that everybody is, as we say, on the same page. Mhm.
Absolutely. All right. The next one, you're not sure how to answer the question. So that means you understood the question, you know what the
Mhm.
question is, you just don't know the answer. Which happens. You don't have to be from another country to be in that situation.
Mhm.
So um, what it says here, like, right, don't pretend to know the answer if you really don't. Whether you are, a young teacher or TA, or even if you are a seasoned instructor, right? So you can, you might still, like, I had a class just on Tuesday, and it's a doctoral level class, and somebody asked an instructor a question, and the instructor straight up said, look, I have no idea. And that would be, native speakers talking to
Mhm.
other native speakers, and they just don't know, and that's okay. Right, so you can say, that's a great question. Let me get back to you on that after I, look into it or research it. But do make sure that you do get back to
Yeah.
them. If you say, oh, I'll get back to you on that, and then you never don't, and it just it
You
makes it look
lose your credibility.
makes you
Mhm.
yeah, it makes you look less professional.
Mhm.
Um, Another way to answer a question like that, right? That's a very good question. One way to answer it is this and this, right? So you might not be answering it fully, but at least you provide some kind of, at least you
Suggestion.
tried, right? Or a great question, let's say if you are a T or an RA, right, you can say, let's ask the professor for their opinion.
Mhm.
Maybe, the instructor, it's okay to say you don't know it, or it's okay to say that you need additional, research.
And especially, if you are just starting out in your teaching career, it's really hard, these kind of situations, because you don't feel like you've established your credibility yet. Maybe you're feeling some imposter syndrome sometimes. And it's much easier, of course, for somebody, in my position to just say, I don't know, nobody's asked me that before. Well, I'm totally comfortable saying that. But certainly when I was very first teaching, it's really hard just to come out to your students and say, I don't know. But your credibility still is on the line, and it's better just to confess that you don't know or ask the other students, hey, anybody have some thoughts on this or these suggestions that Kostya has?
Absolutely. All right. Let's say
Mm,
you are, again, it could be in the classroom, it could be hopefully not in your home. The group members
could be at work
seem
though.
headed for an argument, right? Let's say you are presenting something, and then the group that is watching you, right?
Mhm.
Or you're teaching, you can see that they're starting an argument. So what to do in this situation? Do you want to?
Yeah, so right, what we're saying is you put the students in discussion groups, and again, this could, even be something at work. These strategies would be kind of the same. Um, so you're sharking around, kind of just monitoring everybody, and you can look over at this group and you can see that things are getting heated. So the worst thing really is to act like you don't notice. Um, because you are in charge of the class. You're in charge of how they're interacting with each other. They want someone in authority to say something to the group. So you can imagine the situation, right? You're in a group, somebody brings up something, they don't agree with it, they're about to start fighting, and you don't want to witness this, you don't want to be a part of it, but you are just another student in the group, so you can't jump in and say anything. And that is the case where the TA or whoever really needs to come over and intervene. So in that group, you can remind, this is why it's nice to have objectives for the lesson that day of what the topic is. So, okay, well, it's starting to get a little heated over here. Remember that what you're trying to work on is, and direct them back to, the actual goal of the topic, and say, now we're going away from that. Or you're always welcome to just say, this is an emotional topic. Let's move on. Another suggestion would be, okay, let's take a few seconds here. Everybody just stop and then write down a question that you might have about what's being discussed right now, so that they can just take a little breathe, a little breath time, and actually formulate some ideas without the emotions of talking to someone immediately about that. Yes.
One super quick comment. At the same time, right? So remember, in the US, it is, you should encourage your students to, brainstorm together, discuss something. Like obviously you don't want them to argue, but you still want, don't, it's okay to give them, not necessarily sensitive topics, but you can still give them topics to where they can think about it, right? Where they can discuss it together. Just make sure they don't turn into like full-on arguments, but at the same time, don't think of it as like, oh, I shouldn't give them any kind of
Mm,
tricky talk. Like it's okay to give them tricky topics to discuss because that creates,
Critical
they're
thinking.
right, they're participating, and even if they disagree, you can just establish that at the beginning of class, right? So, I mean, we do that all the time in my classes, right? So obviously, it's okay to disagree, but at the same time, you shouldn't think, oh, this is your
Too
students,
controversial.
right? So your students better if you can push them a little bit so they can develop critical thinking. That's great. Just make sure that you also don't let them argue and fight. So it's yeah. Oh yeah, so some phrases that you can use in terms of when there is an argument like this, right? So you can say and all of these are kind of we were discussing this last week, right? A lot of these phrases are showing that you help the student feel
Validated.
validated. Thank you, right? So when you say I definitely see your point, but have you thought about this and this, right? So when you say I see your point. Obviously, it doesn't mean that you are agreeing or disagreeing. That means that you recognize, where they're coming from, right?
Mhm.
Or you say, sure. Again, when you're saying sure, again, you're not saying I agree. It just means I see you, but
Mhm.
don't you think this and this, right?
Mhm.
Or I can see why you'd think so, and I actually like this third one a lot because not only are you recognizing what they're saying, you're saying, I can see your point. I get it. I get why you think that way. But what about this, right? Or could you explain why you feel that way? That's another great way to say, again, none of these are saying I disagree or I agree with you. It just says that, um, in a way, like I appreciate your thinking, right? Why do you think that way? Right.
Uh-huh. And that last one is really my favorite because that's generally when people are headed for a possible argument here, then they just want to state their side of it. And to have them explain why they feel that way, that may be really their goal in the first place, is
Mhm.
maybe not even to convince the other student, but I want you to hear my point. I want you to hear my side. And I just think that right now, that this is a really big deal in the United States, is there's two sides to everything,
Hmm.
and how do we approach that? And sometimes people, again, they just want to be heard. We're also a college campus, so hopefully they're giving some kind of evidence-based, opinion about this. But I I get a lot personally here at CTE, I get a lot of questions about what do I do with these sorts of things. And not that this presentation is really related to that, but remember that whatever your syllabus says your topics are, those are okay to talk about in class. So if you have some kind of course and you're like, boy, I don't know if I can even talk about these topics anymore. If your syllabus says, here are the readings, then, and that's the reading, then you're protected. And yes, you are allowed to talk about that. You're not going to go to jail.
Academic freedom.
Yeah, academic freedom.
Here's another situation, right? So, and this actually happens quite a bit, right? So let's say you gave them something to do, or you gave them an assignment, and they seem to be finished early, or they're just like they're not participating, they're not really discussing it. So it's the
Mm.
opposite of like where is a discussion, like everyone's just like quiet, right?
I like the picture here. They're just checked out from each other. They're not even interacting anymore.
And I feel like that happens quite a bit, right? So, and you can see that they're uncomfortable or they need your help. So here's what you can do in this situation. I feel like the number one thing you need to do if you are, let's say if you are a TA or an instructor, you do need to be observant and you need to be listening to what maybe they have to, maybe in their heads, again, if you provided a task or a
Mhm.
prompt to discuss, but you didn't provide like the time frame, maybe in their heads they're like, oh, but we are done, right?
Mhm.
So you didn't say 10 minutes. We thought we
Mhm.
were done in two. So honestly, maybe you should be more specific and you should put the time limit, right? So you can say, could you elaborate a little bit more on that? So elaborate in case that means like provide more information. And that just means again, but you do need to listen, right? Or you can say, so what can you say about this and this? Or what stood out to you the most from the reading or from the prompt? Or
Hmm.
what are some of the main points that you're going to present in the class? Just make sure that you do listen to them if you walk around, right? So
Hmm.
sharking around, is that the phrase you use?
That's what I think.
Um, you listen to them and you don't want to, what I'm trying to say, you don't want to be like, well, just go ahead and talk more. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Because that again, that makes you look less professional. You need
Hmm.
to listen to what they have discussed. Maybe in their heads they are done, but you could, as the instructor, as the facilitator, you can say, I've heard this and this. That's
Hmm.
great. What about this, right? So you're
Hmm.
giving them, you're not necessarily just telling them to keep talking just to, just to stay busy, but you're actually you're showing that I've heard what you're saying,
Hmm.
but I want you to, dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we've made our point, but often the students, they don't know what to do. So you might have an introvert in the group
Mhm.
who's like, I don't think we're really done, but they act like they're done. So I'm just going to sit here. And so that's not fair for that student. And maybe the whole group is like, okay, I don't know what else to do. I'll just pretend like I'm texting somebody and so it may not be the case that they're done and they all hate each other, but they just don't know what to do.
Mhm.
So, if it is one of those get together and then you're going to share out to the class, just have them practice it. Okay, so let's say it's your turn to do the sharing. What are you going to say and who's going to do it? And that might even give them more time to interact with each other of, oh, wait, we didn't actually finish what we thought we had finished. So it may not be that they're just, again, a bunch of lazy students and they're, slacking off, but they just don't know what to do. And that's your job is to help them out.
Very true. Yeah, so that's it. Why
So,
don't you
yeah, I just wanted to say to remember that CTE is not just for, tenured faculty or something. We really are here for anyone who's teaching, and we can come into your class and do an observation. We're very nice.
mm,
And just to see how you're interacting with your students and how it's going. We can do focus groups, which means the instructor is out in the hall and the students are talking about how they think the class is going, which can be super awkward, of course, if you're the instructor, but it's also very, very helpful to get that feedback that maybe you just weren't aware of. We also, each spring, CTE puts on the Graduate Teaching Institute, and it's specifically designed for all of our graduate teaching assistants and with topics that are pertinent, not just for the international ones, but for everybody. But those are great.
yeah. One quick thing, and it's, you know, even like the most seasoned instructors think, oh, I know everything. I know how to like do it's always great to like even like in my classes, I see that some instructors don't know how like I could well, I shouldn't criticize them. I'll just say they could benefit from learning a little bit more about Canvas. They can benefit more about managing groups. They can benefit
Mhm.
more from all these things. So just because you are familiar, you can always learn something new, or maybe you realize, oh, I have been doing it this way.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Mhm.
It's good just to validate that, okay, I was doing the right thing in the first place. It really is that student's lazy.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll make you feel like less of a, experience that imposter syndrome where you're like, oh, I don't belong. Hopefully this will help you feel like that you are on the right track. So thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? We're happy to, we're in a few minutes early. Does anyone have any questions about what we discussed today? Or maybe you have some suggestions for future topics? What would maybe benefit you? What would you like to learn about the future? We are going to have another,
I'd like to learn lots of things about the future. I thought you were
I
about to
know.
say that.
Yeah, and thanks, Al. Yes, there's going to be slides from today. Um, September 2027. Anyway, so we also have another workshop that's going to be in November. If we're always interested. I usually try to collect or like review the feedback and see what students actually like, what topics they prefer. So if you
Hmm.
have some other topics that
That's
you
it.
would like to learn about, we would be happy to incorporate them.
Otherwise, that's all.
Yeah, so thank you so much for attending. We're going to be posting the recording under the in the iTab on the iTab's website. But yeah, other than that, thank you so much. If you still have more ideas, please put them in the chat. We'll definitely review them and incorporate the ideas. But thanks. Have a good the rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.